Hello and welcome back to the Usage Report. I am your host, Josh Shepardson, and you can follow me on Twitter where I post as @bchad50. And unfortunately, smokescreen season is not over. It does not end with the preseason and all the off-season coach talk and nonsense. We got a little bit of that this week in a very surprising fashion in Dallas. The talk all week coming out of going into week 7 was that Christine Michael was going to be have the reins taken off, and it was going to be the Christine Michael show, and this, that, and the other thing. And while a number of us experts, including myself, did caution jumping right on him and using him right out of the gates until we saw what this actually meant, it was still surprising to see him only log 7 offensive snaps, 5 carries. He totaled 1 reception, ran for 18 yards. I wouldn't exactly say they let the reins off of him. They did, however, let the reins off of Darren McFadden, who played 59 offensive snaps. That's almost 5 times as many snaps as Christine Michael and Joseph Randall combined. Carried the ball 29 times, rumbled for 152 yards rushing, also caught 2 passes. McFadden's already established himself as the best pass catching back in that backfield now that Lance Dunbar is down for the season. And the fact that he's now getting the carries, or got the carries this past week, makes him a potential every down back in what was a running back by committee situation. But McFadden's big effort should earn him some leash, and he immediately becomes worth the #1 waiver claim in your league, immediately becomes worth what you have of your fab budget. If you can make $0 claims, I would say throw everything you've got on Darren McFadden at this point. That offense should improve with the return of Des Bryant, and eventually with the return of Tony Romo, and grabbing a feature back that can play every down. Yes, McFadden does have an injury history, but getting that at this point in the season behind that offensive line in Dallas is exciting, especially if that offense is going to be scoring more with some weapons coming back here at some point. As far as Christine Michael, I'm not. Maybe I'm being naive, but I wouldn't cut bait just yet. Let's go one more week with him, see exactly what happens with McFadden. He does have, as I said, a lengthy injury history throughout his career, and it is worth noting that Michael's 7 snaps bested Joseph Randall's 5. Probably a little bit premature to cut Randall at this point, but he should not have a very long leash at this point. He wasn't very impressive as I can't even call him the feature back in that backfield before, because from day one it was a committee situation, so he never really was the true feature back. Maybe he was the most utilized back, we'll say, but they were giving touches to Dunbar, they were giving touches to McFadden, never really shined enough to claim that feature back status, and unlikely that he's going to. So again, give him another week just to make sure that they're not crazy there in Dallas and they don't do any wild things with jumbling the offensive snaps up. But looks like this is going to be the Darren McFadden show as long as he's healthy. So definitely worth a premium priority claim and a lot of your fab budget. Next up, let's look at Indianapolis. Gore was the most productive back again this week, but another not exciting effort from him. 9 carries, 43 yards. Did make some waves through the air, catching 5 passes, totaled 75 yards from scrimmage. Pretty ho-hum effort. If you're in a full point per reception league, the 5 receptions definitely help boost his value. Even if you're in a half point per reception, that definitely adds up. But the real takeaway for me from this game was the fact that he played 31 snaps and Ahmad Bradshaw played 29. That's almost a 50-50 snap split, and basically highlights my concerns that I brought up in the buy low, sell high article last week, and that's that the presence of Ahmad Bradshaw is going to result in him playing some snaps. And he was effective last year with the Colts. He's considered a good pass blocker. He's a superior pass catcher to Frank Gore, at least has been historically. Didn't really play out this week with Gore catching. The fact is, he is a presence that's going to be around to keep Gore, I guess, fresh down the stretch, you could say. They talked early in the season about not wanting to run him into the ground, so that fresh during the playoffs, but they're going to have to get to the AFC South is weak. They can certainly see their own division. I don't know if they should be worrying too much about keeping anyone fresh. They need to get their best players touches, but I'm not so sure that Gore should be out there all the time anyway. And last week presented an opportunity to sell high on week. Value probably takes a slight hit, but 75 yards from scrimmage isn't bad. And those fantasy gamers who are just checking the box scores and aren't looking into snaps played probably don't realize how close the snap counts were for Gore and Bradshaw. So you look at the carries total, you look at the targets and receptions, it looks like Gore was on the field all the time and Bradshaw was merely your standard backup. But lifting up the hood and looking a little bit deeper, you can see that there is a bit of a playing time issue here that could hamper Gore's value going forward. So I'm going to double down on my stance and say cash out on Frank Gore if you can now. And that backfield just isn't a great one to be invested in, especially since they're passing the ball so much these days. Next up is another backfield. Let's go to Kansas City, where Charcandrick West disappointed in his first start in place of Jamal Charles. But he certainly made up for it this past week, carrying the ball 22 times, rushing for 110 yards, added 2 receptions. There is no question who the feature back is now in the absence of Jamal Charles. Niall Davis played just 3 offensive snaps, carried the ball 1 time. The only other back on the roster, and I say back, is DeAnthony Thomas, who also sees some time at wide receiver, kind of a gadget player. 20 offensive snaps, just 1 carry, caught 2 of his 3 targets. This is the Charcandrick West show in that backfield. And while the Chiefs' offense isn't explosive, isn't going to score a ton of points, you can count on West getting a fairly decent volume of work, and that has me thinking that at worst he's a flex most weeks just based on that volume alone. He doesn't have to be great if he's getting a lot of touches, and he should be getting a lot of touches. And if the matchup is right, certainly has some RB2 upside. So if an impatient owner casts him to the wire after his disappointing first game, don't let him sit there. Go out there and grab him. If I were to rank the backs in terms of who I would like most of the guys that we've talked about, that are likely available, I would claim McFadden over West, but the gap is not large. Go ahead and claim either or both of those backs and hope you end up with one, because both look like they have a chance to be true feature backs, and there aren't a lot of those around the league. Speaking of situations where there isn't a feature back, let's go to the Tennessee Titans, where it was Dexter McCluster who led the backfield in offensive snaps with 39. Antonio Andrews played less than half as many snaps, playing 17. And Bishop Sankey, yuck. It's safe to say that he's playing like a bust. He's not going to shed that bust label anytime soon, playing just 2 offensive snaps, carrying the ball 0 times, and getting targeted once in the passing game. You know what McCluster is at this point. He's another one of these gadget players. It's something of a pass-catching back, something of a receiver, not a true running back. Was targeted 8 times, caught the ball 6 times, carried the ball just 5 times. He's not even reliable enough receiver to be relied on as a flex option in full-point PPRs every week. And he's certainly not a feature back. Antonio Andrews was the most productive runner, carrying the ball 10 times and totaling 57 yards. 5.7 yards per carry, certainly nothing to sneeze at. But if you're only going to carry the ball 10 times, and you're not going to play 20 snaps with the backfield in what it currently is, what it resembles, then if that's pretty close to your ceiling, you're not even worth rostering. The entire reason I highlighted this backfield isn't to point out what a mess it is yet again, because I've certainly done that a few times this year. It's actually to bring to gamers' attention that David Cobb is on the mend. He's practicing. He's eligible to come off injured reserve with the designation to return in week 9. That is the first week that he's eligible to return, and the talk is that he should return by then. I imagine he'll have some rust to shake off. He's probably not going to be leaned on super heavily in his first week back, maybe even his second week back. But if you've got a nice lead in the standings, if you've got a bench spot to work with, if you're in need of a running back, maybe you're an unfortunate Arian Foster owner who lost him for the season, maybe you're still scrambling to replace Jamal Charles, go ahead and scoop up David Cobb, see how this backfield shakes out, because there just hasn't been a guy that's taken the reins and run away with the feature back status there in Tennessee. Sankey looked like the guy coming into the season that had maybe the most potential to do that as a high pick last year in the NFL draft. But they don't have that guy right now. If Cobb comes out and plays well, it certainly shouldn't take much for him to rise to the top of that heap, that running back heap, and maybe steal a lion's share of touches there. Moving on to the passing attack, and I mentioned Arian Foster. His absence should force the Texans into airing the ball out some more. And while DeAndre Hopkins has already established himself as a top 5 wide receiver for the rest of the season, Nate Washington returned in a big way. He actually led the team in targets with 16 this past week. He caught 9 balls, totaled 127 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns. And this isn't his first 100-yard plus receiving game of the year. This is actually his second, and he's been a target machine there. He's totaled 16 targets last week, and he's getting targeted regularly. He's hovering around 8 or more targets this year. He has 8 or more in 4 of the 5 games that he's been healthy enough to play in. The 5th game that he didn't reach 8 targets, he actually left hurt, so it's tough to ding him for that. Cecil Shorts III will eventually be back to crowd this receiving core a little bit. And again, there's no question who their top receiver is, DeAndre Hopkins, but Arian Foster's been eliminated as a pass catcher since he's out for the year with an injury. They don't have a tight end that they lean on, so there's plenty of looks to go around. And if they're going to air it out, Nate Washington becomes something of a pretty close to weekly wide receiver 3, or at least a flex. You don't usually see a guy like that emerge at this point in the season. 32-year-old receivers that don't have a track record of excellence also don't pop up like this. Washington has had good seasons, so that's not really meant as a knock against him, but he's playing at a higher level than we're typically used to seeing. But I'm buying what he's selling at this point just based on what that offense is going to have to look like the rest of the year to cope with the loss of their star running back. Next up is the Indianapolis Colts, and this is a situation that we've looked at time and time again. Donte Moncrief remains their number 2. He's a considerably better option than Andre Johnson. He was targeted 6 times to Johnson's 4. Both receivers caught 4 passes. Johnson bested Moncrief by 10 receiving yards, but Moncrief caught another touchdown. That's 5 touchdowns this year and 5 games played with Andrew Luck. He is a red zone target for Luck. The two have great chemistry. And Moncrief at this point is a reliable wide receiver 3 every week. And if the matchup's right, is a strong wide receiver 2. He's not available in any competitive league at this point. But if you do own him, feel good about his stock. It's right where you want it to be. It's high, and he's reliable. But I actually chose to highlight their receiving core to point out the ridiculous 15 targets for T.Y. Hilton. If you just look at the receptions and yardage and touchdowns, they're all nice, but you'd think 4 receptions, how many times could he really be targeted? 15. Luck was not on point with him, but it's hard to complain with 4 receptions for 150 yards and a pair of touchdowns. And the 15 targets illustrates that the upside was even greater than the results that we saw from T.Y. Hilton. He is the unquestioned number 1 there. If you are a T.Y. Hilton owner, it is promising to see that uptick in targets since Moncrief was creeping into T.Y. Hilton's range, I guess you could say, is the number 1 there. Hilton has been the more productive receiver this year in terms of receptions and targets and yardage, but boosted that gap this week. So T.Y. Hilton owners, you've got yourself a number 1 receiver still. Nothing to worry about there. Next up, let's take a look at the Minnesota Vikings. And if you listened to the pod last week, if you read the article last week, if you read a lot of articles on fantasyfootballcafe.com last week, Stephon Diggs got some ink, some virtual ink, and he delivered again. 9 targets, resulted in 6 receptions, his second 100-plus yard receiving effort in 3 games for the rookie 5th rounder, 108 yards receiving, and he found pay dirt. Also carried the ball once, so he's been doing it all. He is the unquestioned number 1 receiver there. And while people were freaking out at the end of last week about what his playing time could look like with the return of Charles Johnson, there was some talk that he wasn't running with the first team, and then those that talk was corrected, and he was back in there with the first unit. While he played more offensive snaps than any other receiver, he's been the most productive receiver on that team by a landslide, especially on a per-game receiving yards basis. But even total cumulative receiving yards, he's bested Mike Wallace already. Wallace was targeted 5 times. He caught 4 balls for 36 yards, played 56 offensive snaps. Wallace is going to have occasional flex value if the matchup's right, but Diggs is really the only reliable member of that passing attack, and he's an every week start at this point. And if you grabbed him, kudos. If he's still available by some crazy stroke of luck, he's worth a higher waiver priority claim than any other player highlighted in today's article. I will take him to McFadden. I will take him to Charcandrick West, just because you're likely to get more consistent production from him, even in a offense that isn't necessarily super pass happy. Diggs is still getting tons of targets and really producing with what he's getting. So make sure that Diggs is rostered. If he's not, as I said, stacking him up, I would take Diggs above all, followed by McFadden and then Charcandrick West. Next up is the New England Patriots, and last week I suggested that if Dion Lewis missed any time, that Danny Amendola would be the primary beneficiary, and that basically played out as expected. Dion Lewis did miss a game. I was a little bit surprised by that because he played nicked up the week before, did not play this week. Danny Amendola responded as the short pass catching threat with 9 targets, 8 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. And anytime Dion Lewis is going to miss time, I feel very confident that Amendola makes for a solid flex play. And if you're a DFS gamer, he's an awesome option when Dion Lewis is out there, because most likely his salary is not going to be very high at any of these DFS sites. And Rob Gronkowski played like Gronk this week. Total 16 targets, 11 receptions, 108 yards receiving, and a touchdown. He is the best tight end on the planet. Nothing has changed there. That is pretty much par for the course. What isn't par for the course is that we got to see Brandon LaFell this week. It was his first activity this season after beginning of the year on the PUP list. Played 48 offensive snaps, was targeted 8 times, caught only 2 balls, was hit in the hands with the other 6 and dropped them. That is not good. He's got rust to shake off. We know Bill Belichick doesn't deal with players failing very well. So if LaFell's going to keep dropping passes, that's going to hurt his playing time. But one would have to suspect he's going to get a little bit of leash since he's being thrown right into the fire. He's worth rostering in all league types of 12 teams or larger. Doesn't matter if you're a full-point PPR or standard scoring league. LaFell's worth grabbing. Brady's playing at such a high level. Getting anybody that can get regular playing time with him and might get some targets is worthwhile, and LaFell was very good last year in that offense. So I do like LaFell as a stash. I would not play him the next couple weeks until we see him really shake that rust off and perform at a higher level than we saw this week. But he is another big target for Brady and a guy who could pay some dividends down the stretch. The last situation we're going to look at is a Seattle Seahawks passing situation, and Jimmy Graham followed up his breakout performance as a Seahawk with another clunker. 2 receptions on 5 targets for 31 yards and 0 touchdowns. This is a guy who's now just a fringe top 5 tight end. There are some weeks that he's not going to crack the top 10 in scoring just because of the way that this offense flows in Seattle. It is a run-first offense. It is the Marshawn Lynch show with Russell Wilson basically complimenting him through the air when need be. Seahawks have allowed more sacks than any other club in the league, so that makes it tough to really rely on Wilson dropping back and passing. And that offensive line has been lost. But not all is bad in the Seattle pass-catching group. Tyler had his most productive team as a pro. The rookie caught all 5 of his targets, 29 yards. All of the totals lead the team next week. So he's emerging. I don't expect him to be a reliable, consistent receiver week to week, but more explosive than Jermaine Kearse and Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin's days of even being a mediocre rosterable option are done. He only caught 2 passes, total 19. He has no ceiling. His floor is very low. He's just simply not worth rostering. Jermaine Kearse occasionally has a decent game. This would qualify as a decent game. 3 receptions for 64 yards, but I mean, that's pretty much about the ceiling for him, and he's another guy with a low floor. Lockett is the most viable receiver on that team. I say he's worth rostering if you've got a bench spot to work with in a 12-team league or larger. I do think that if that offensive line can shore up its play a little bit here down the stretch, you could see Wilson have a little bit more success, and I think Lockett is the key to that. So, and if you're in a league that counts return yardage for points, then Lockett should have been scooped up a long time ago, but all the more value for him there. So go ahead and grab Tyler Lockett if you've got a bench spot to work with in 12-team leagues or larger. And that's going to wrap things up. Thank you for tuning in. Check out fantasyfootballcafe.com for some great articles and content. Also stop by the Fantasy Football Cafe forums to chat some football, have some questions answered, or answer some questions of others in the Draft Trade Keeper forum, as well as checking out all the other forums on the site. Until next week, good luck in your fantasy football matchups.